Alright guys, so we're back with another video. In this video, I'm going to be telling you guys 4 middle game concepts that you need to know in order to play a good game of chess. But before I get into that, just a reminder to you guys to just click that subscribe button so you guys can stay up to date with my latest content. Alright, let's get into it. So the first concept that I want to introduce to you guys is improving your pieces. Now, it's very important for you to improve your pieces because if your pieces aren't on good squares, they won't be able to work for you to win the game. Right? So let's take a look at this position. So at first sight, white seems to be clearly better. All his pieces are active. The opponent has a weakness on a6. And the queen side pawn majority is an asset for white, especially in the endgame. And on top of that, black has a very poorly placed knight, which is on e8. Now, I'm going to give you guys a chance to just pause, look for yourself, and see what move black could possibly make to help improve his pieces. Alright, so I hope you guys have given it some good thought. Now, the move here is pawn to g6. Simple, but very strong. What black plans to do is that he wants to play knight to g7 to improve the knight and bring it to the f5 square, where it would be the most active, influencing on the opponent's side of the board. Right? So I'm just going to show you how the game progresses. So bishop f1, knight g7, heading to h4, h5 or f5, queen e3, knight f5. So the knight finds a good place on f5, where it controls very nice squares, especially in the center. Queen h3, rook d8. So in just like 4 moves, black's pieces are definitely better than they were when we were looking at the original position, right? And all that comes from good planning and understanding that he needed to improve the piece. In the initial position, right? In the initial position here, we realized that this knight on e8 was a problem piece. So we needed to come up with a good plan in order to improve it. And that good plan was to just go g6 and improve it by going g7 to f5. Alright, so next concept that we're going to look at is the concept of pawn play. Now, or I should say pawn breaks. Now, pawn breaks are useful tools strategically to help you to either open up the game in your favor or to create weaknesses that you can exploit. So let's talk about this position. So black just needs a few moves to play, like rook d8, bishop g7, castles, and then he would almost be practically better in this position. However, it's white to move here, and he manages to alter the pawn structure in his favor with the pawn break, pawn to d5. Now, this advance has several virtues to it, right? It gets rid of the backward d pawn, which was a problem right here, right? It was a backward pawn. So it aims to get rid of it. So when it goes to d5, it gives itself up. So it's no longer backward. Also, it helps to create a mobile pawn majority. What a pawn majority is when there are more pawns on one side of the board that you have over your opponent. So after c takes d5, queen takes d5, white now would have a pawn majority because now he has 3 pawns in his queen side versus black's 2. And what that does, why that's an advantage, is because it gives white the opportunity to potentially create a pass pawn, especially in the endgame. So queen d7. Exchanges won't fix black's problems. Rook a d1, maintaining the tension, keeping the file. Queen takes d5, rook takes d5, bishop e7, and now pawn b4. White's plan is very simple, right? He wants to convert, as I said to you before, his pawn majority that he has into a pass pawn. And black isn't able to do the same thing on the king side because of these double pawns on the king side. Let's just go through a couple more moves. Rook c8, rook fd1, rook c7, knight d2. Very good move, heading to the c4 square so that he can take advantage of the weak squares on b6, d6. Pawn f5, knight c4. Oh, also, just a slight note. This is another testament to the first concept that we talked about, which was we need to improve our pieces. The knight on f3 wasn't doing much from where it's at in its position, so white needed to improve the position of the knight, and the best way was to go knight d2 to bring it to a more active square on c4 where it was doing more. Alright, so f5, knight c4, castle, g3, g7, king g2, rook d8, rook takes d8, rook takes d8, and pawn a4. And little by little, white continues with this plan, whereas black lacks any real active counterplay. Alright. Alright, so the next concept that we're going to be talking about is exchanges. Right? Making good exchanges. Now, exchanges are good to make when you're trying to get an ideal piece situation on the board. What I mean by an ideal piece situation on the board is you want to have, it's not what you take, it's the pieces that you have left on the board after the exchange is made. Alright, so looking at this example, the last move from white was knight d2 to e4, with the idea that he wants to swap off this good knight on c5. So here, the idea that black came with was bishop to f5, which is a very brilliant response. So black prepares to exchange the bishop for the white knight so that his knight on c5 remains the most powerful piece on the board. So now in a few moves, I'm going to tell you why it's so powerful. So rook c4, pawn to b3, just fixing the weakness here. On b2, we don't have to rush to take the knight on f5, on e4 I should say, because it's not going anywhere. The queen is still pinned to this knight. So queen to c1. Alright, so now, for better or worse, we'll have to take the knight now. So bishop takes knight. Bishop takes e4. Alright, so now let me explain why this knight is so much better than this bishop. Now, this knight is placed firmly on c5 because none of white's pawns, white has no pawns that can challenge the knight to get rid of him. Right? There's no pawns that can challenge this knight. Also, there are no pieces that can directly challenge this knight of the same value. Because white has a light square bishop, he'll never be able to harass this knight that's on the dark square. In addition to that, this bishop, the majority of white's pawns are on, well, not the majority, but the critical pawns are on light squares. So it blocks the activity of the white bishop. So the scope of the bishop is very limited. So that's what makes this knight better than this bishop. So let's just go through a couple more moves that was played in the game and just see how black converts from having this better piece. To give you some context, bishop g2, queen a5, activating the queen and also connecting the rooks. Pawn to h4, queen to b5, queen c3, and knight to a4. A typical method when you have a superior position, black forces the exchange of queens because any move made from white here that doesn't involve exchanging is gonna lose a pawn by force. After something like queen c2, knight takes b2 comes to mind. So queen b4, queen takes b4, rook takes b4, and now rook b8, trying to trade off white's active rook with a tempo as well because we're also attacking b2. After this exchange happens, rook takes. White's rook now becomes passive because he has to protect this weak pawn on b2. So, and also bear in mind the bishop. The bishop is bad because he can't protect this pawn that's on the dark square. Rook to c8, again, always thinking about how we can improve our pieces. The rook wasn't doing anything on b8. So we move it over to c1 where it has a clear open file and the ability to attack white's weakness. Rook c8, bishop h3, pawn g6, e4. Trying to exploit the weakness of the diagonal here. But we just continue with our active play. Because if we can get this pawn, then our pawn is that much closer to the promised land on the back rank. So rook a1, knight c5. Just bringing the knight back, safeguarding this pawn, and also putting some pressure on e4. E takes f5. Don't need to worry about that. Just take this pawn, clearing the path for our pass pawn. F takes g6, h takes g6, bishop check, just a check, no big deal. Rook a8 check, king e7, rook a7, king d8, bishop f7, Nothing to really see here. Rook c2, bishop takes g6, and now pawn e4, just cutting the communication of the bishop from also stopping the promotion down to b1. And all of this made possible because of our strong knight on c5, just being a better piece. All right. Now the last and final concept that I'm going to introduce to you guys is prophylaxis. Now prophylaxis is basically just stopping your opponent's ideas before they even come on the board. Right? So here, White's last move was rook to d2 to e2. We can safely say that we can think that his next couple of moves will be rook to e1, with the idea of trying to go for mate with rook to e8, because the queen cuts off the escape square on h7. So now that we understand what White wants, we can use prophylactic thinking and play pawn to g6. Now this is a typical prophylactic measure, with king g7 next. Safeguards the king from any surprise along the back rank, and moreover takes away the f5 square and the h5 square from White's pieces. Right? Alright, so rook fe1, king g7. Yeah, all of a sudden now White is lacking active plans. Knight g2, pawn to h5, setting up some positional threats of pawn to h4 and trying to weaken White's pawns on the king side. Pawn to h3, rook d6, knight f4, rook b6. Now Black eyes his sights on the weak pawn on b2, and White lacks sufficient counterplay due to our prophylactic measures that we put in place. Rook to b1, pawn to c3, pawn to b4, and now we get a good instance of one of the other concepts which we discussed before, which is pawn break a5, geared towards weakening White's queenside pawns. Rook e4, and now rook to d8, from Black improving his rook on d8. The rook from here, it wasn't doing much anymore because it's just looking at this pawn on c3. It's already being firmly protected by this bishop on f6. So there was no need to overprotect it with the rook. So Black now chose a more active place to put the rook, which was d8, where it can wreak havoc on the second rank. So White saved the b pawn, but he left himself open now on the second rank. So just to go through some more moves. Rook to e1, pawn takes b4, pawn takes b4, rook takes b4, house falling down, queen takes b4, and now it's very easy conversion. Rook e4, queen b2, rook e2, and rook to d2, and white has to resign here because evidently the plan is just to get off these pieces, push the pawn, and nothing will stop it. Alright, so that's it, guys. Those were the 4 concepts that I wanted to introduce. Improving your pieces, pawn breaks, prophylaxis, and the 4th one, which was exchanges. If you liked these concepts that you just learned, click the like button on the video and stay tuned for more content.